Hey everybody, welcome back to the Woodworking Talk Show. Just a reminder, if you are woodworking curious and don't know where to begin, I have a free guide showing you how you can get all the tools you need for under $1,000, and we keep that list updated every month because tool companies seem to be obsessed with discontinuing tools and changing model numbers. Have you noticed this, Jonathan? Does this just drive you crazy?
I feel like every time I buy a 20-volt battery, they come out with a 21-volt battery the next week.
They do. And then they'll, like, I'm always trying to recommend a table saw, and they change the model numbers like monthly. For some reason, they have model number 28B and then 28B-2 or something. I'm like, what did you change? And other than the price.
Table saws haven't changed in years. You go and look at all these job site saws, and they all have the same features they've always had. There's really no change. And you know what's interesting is the saw stop patent is expiring this year.
Oh.
And so I think the table saw world is going to change greatly in the next 12 months.
That'll probably become standardized, I would imagine, in most saws.
Yeah.
Be sure to download my free guide over at mytoollist.com. Now, here comes the fancy intro, Jonathan. You ready for this?
I'm ready.
In June 2015, Jonathan Katz-Moses began posting videos showcasing his handmade jewelry boxes. And a couple years later, he was the king of the dovetail joint. I coined that expression. He designed the magnetic dovetail jig that makes it easy for anyone to hand cut perfect dovetails every time. Jonathan, did you ever use one of those router dovetail jigs? I had one of those.
My obsession with dovetails early on was intense, so I tried to every way but to learn it. And finally, I was like, all right, I got to learn how to do this. So I bought a very cheap one of those, and it didn't work at all. Yeah. It was terrible.
Oh, it was horrible. I used mine. I think I must have paid, this is probably close to 20 years ago. I must have paid like $200 for this thing. And I think it was Craftsman or something. And it was this plastic thing, and you would put your router in. I think I used it twice because every time I wanted to use it, I would have to like relearn the whole thing because it was really confusing how to set it up. And I'm like, whenever somebody asks about dovetails, I always just say, you're probably better off just learning how to cut them by hand. It'd probably be quicker.
Yeah, I feel like you need to go back to college to use one of those router ones.
Today, Jonathan has a massive 5,000 square foot shop where he creates, I think, mostly products for woodworkers. We'll have to get into that some more. His videos are geared toward more of the high-end production woodworking with a lot of tips, techniques, tool discussions, and advice for getting the most out of your shop. After all of that, hey, Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Steve. I've been a long time fan. You sort of helped me begin my journey, and it's very nice to meet you in person or over here.
Oh, thank you for that. Thank you for that. Take us back to, probably pre-2015. I would imagine you were doing a bit of woodworking before you jumped into YouTube. And tell us a little bit about your story.
Very early on in my story, in high school, I started making custom speaker boxes, and I ended up starting a car stereo installation company out of my parents' garage, and really enjoyed it. But then, I moved down to Santa Barbara, California after high school, and it is one of the most expensive towns to live in. So I never lived in a place where I could have a shop. But then I became a contractor. I had a construction company where I was a general contractor for about 8 or 9 years. And really enjoyed framing and, rough carpentry. But then when I left that company in 2014, I very quickly realized, my personality, I can't sit still for more than 10 seconds. And I helped a roommate of mine build a flower planter bench for his girlfriend for Christmas. And he went to work and he got home. He was a cab driver. He got home at 2 a.m. I was still in the garage working on it. And after that, I was just absolutely obsessed. I knew this is what I wanted to do for the rest of my life.
What made you decide to start posting videos on YouTube? It looks like your first videos were you showing projects that you'd already made. And I don't know if it looked like you were kind of specializing in jewelry boxes. Is that right?
That was kind of my first obsession. I saw Matt Kenny from Fine Woodworking, before YouTube is where everyone put their videos. This was on like his own website. He had a 7-part series where he made a jewelry box. And I thought the dovetails he cut were just the coolest looking thing I'd ever seen. And so I wanted to do that. And boxes are an amazing, I call it a rite of passage for woodworkers because the cost of entry is so cheap. The amount of wood you need is so small that you could go buy one board and get a jewelry box out of it. And so I was really obsessed with those. And that's sort of what led to the Dovetail Jig and my creation of that.
Yeah, let's talk about the dovetails. So, and I was kind of being flippant when I said you're the king of the dovetails, but I sort of see you that way because you came up with this jig. You invented this, and I don't know, I've never seen anything like it before when you came out with that. And so it's a magnetic jig that holds, well, you describe it. It holds your saw in the correct position, right? Yeah, there it is.
Correct. It's a magnetic jig. This is actually one of the first prototypes. It doesn't even have a logo on it. It's a magnetic jig, and the angles in the post match the angles here. So this is your tail side. Your board sits like this, and your saw attaches with these very heavy-duty magnets. There's 10 pounds of pulling pressure here, and it cuts the tails, and then you can flip your board around or flip the jig around and do the other side of your tails. And then when you go to your pin board, you put these sides against your board, which then matches that exact same angle on the jig, but it turns it sideways like this. So then you can cut the plumb cut, which is a 90 degree to the board cut, but it's angled. This is an 8-to-1, which is 7.1 degrees, and then 6-to-1, which is 9.6 degrees. So it just makes it really easy. And I think what's very unique about mine, there was another one on the market from Lee Valley, but theirs just did pins and tails. Mine also has a shoulder side, which is 90 degrees to the board. So when you cut the shoulder cut on the side of your board, so if this is your dovetails up here, you can make this 90 degree cut here. And it also has 2 magnets, which is much more stable than one. So I think people really enjoy it. It's also kind of a fraction of the cost of some of the other ones on the market.
What is it about dovetails? What do you think it is? See, when I got into woodworking, I thought this was like every woodworker has to make dovetails. And I remember I even recently had a video on my saws, and my least used saw is my dovetail saw because I bought it and I thought, I got to learn how to cut dovetails. And I did it a couple times and I got sort of good, but then I never stuck with it. Maybe I need that jig.
I think the thing behind dovetails is it's sort of a litmus test for your skills. It's also something that I don't think is required of any woodworker, but it's like there's a joy to getting dovetails to fit together because it is hard, and there is no two ways about it. It's hard and it takes practice. But it becomes a litmus test where you can show that to any other woodworker and they go, oh yeah, you know how to woodwork. And so I think that's the kind of the reason that it's become so synonymous with woodworking. But I also, there's guys like Chris Salamone and Sean Boyd from Four Eyes Furniture. They've never cut a dovetail. Actually, I did a video with Sean, but point being is they've never used it in any of their projects, and they do phenomenal work and they're phenomenal woodworkers. So I don't think there's any, like, you have to cut dovetails, but it's fun for people who have engineering brains, who really like the intricacy of getting things to fit together well. I think that you can derive a lot of passion from a good set of dovetails, I think.
Have you ever made one of those dovetails? It's like a box, and it's like the impossible dovetails, where you see it on all 4 sides.
Yeah. I think I remember you doing one of those a long time.
No, I've never done that.
Oh, somebody did.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the trick to those is it's actually really simple to do that. It's just a router cut with a dovetail bit through the diagonal of a square, and then the inverse on the top square. So when you put it together, it looks like you somehow fit all these dovetails together. But it's really just one cut.
How would you describe your audience, the people who watch your videos? Because you kind of appeal, as I mentioned in the intro, I think towards the more of the high-end woodworker and more production. I could be wrong about that, but it kind of strikes me that way. But at the same time, you have an interesting mix of technology and just like hand-cut dovetails. So you're kind of bridging the gap there.
Yeah, I think my audience skews beginner to intermediate, actually. And the reason is, when you get into woodworking, you begin the consumption phase and the acquisition phase, which is you consume video. I did it with you when I started, and you acquire tools. And so I think that I figured out a long time ago, I think maybe early 2018, that if I wanted to, I love teaching. And so if I wanted to get out more information, doing a build video every week is just not possible. A whole full scale furniture build is not possible. So I started supplementing those build videos with techniques, tips and tricks videos that focused on individual aspects from something I was working on. So if it was a type of joinery, I could do something. And then, 3 weeks later, we have a build project that uses that technique. And I don't have to spend 8 minutes in the build video talking about the joinery. So that slowly evolved over time to, I think, me really catering to beginner to intermediate, because I think there's a natural drop off of viewership in the advanced range because people aren't consuming information anymore and they aren't acquiring as many tools. So they're in their shop working. So I always like to try and think about my audience sort of the same way you do. I don't always succeed, but that, they're acquiring cheaper tools. Where are the deals? How can we do things like this? Is a video I put out a couple of weeks ago.
The coping saw.
Yeah. And coping saws are one of those things that they are terrible until you spend $190 on one. And it's because you can't get tension on the blade. So I did this video where you can build this saw for about $30 all in. And it's just as good as any new concept saw. So I like to try and think about my audience and remember that they aren't, working with 5x10 CNCs and 4 lasers in their shops like I do.
Right. Yeah. You've got a pretty big shop. It's a 5,000 square foot shop. Yep. And I saw the shop tour video, all the tools you have in there. And what are you producing out of that? Is your production these tools for woodworkers? Is that your primary focus?
Yeah. In fact, I've been very fortunate that the Dovetail Jig was a big success in the beginning because I've been able to build my business without sponsorships. So I'm able to really focus on putting out content I love and I think my audience will love, and creating awesome products. Right behind me, you see the Katz-Moses universal no deflection stop block. That's our number one seller. And this was one that I came up with because I was so frustrated with a T-track stop block that I bought because it flexed 1/8 of an inch when it was locked down. And it's just unacceptable. And so a lot of the tools I create come from frustrations with things that are on the market now. And in fact, we're expanding that right now. We're hiring product developers. We're going to become a big tool distribution company who focuses on developing ideas for content creators in the creator economy and bringing in high quality, high value tools that I think, a lot of bigger companies have lost sight of. A lot of times you buy things from them and they may be highly priced and fairly inaccurate, or, like the Dovetail Jig we were talking about, that was a $60 I'll never get back. And it never completed a task for me.
Exactly. You think you need that. Are you selling like white label tools, or, put your own branding on those?
Yeah, we will do some of those because I'm only, one person. I can't invent 500 tools a year, but
oh, come on. Sure you can. Hustle.
I know. Get moving, baby. The product development timeline is insane. We have a product coming out with another content creator here in a couple months that we've been working on since February, and we just now ordered materials. But the process for that is time intensive and it's hard. And I think we spoke about, where I think my audience is at in the tool acquisition phase. It's really going to be a pleasure for me to be able to say, like, look, if you come to my store, I promise you this is in my shop. This is something I use every day and I think is a great tool. And that is, something I think I've built my reputation on, is that I like to provide high quality for high value. And so it's exciting to do this. And it's exciting that, other people are believing in our mission statement and joining the team. We're going to be up to about 10 employees here in about 2 weeks. And it's really exciting. And I love providing jobs and a living wage. And, I let people telecommute and all of those great things that I think employers should do.
What inspires you to come up with the ideas for the things that you invent, the tools that you come up with? And now that you're hiring other people, are you going to start to actually increase the, R&D and have other people on board to help you design and invent things?
Absolutely. We just brought in 2 more lasers to the shop, which brings us to a total of 4 lasers. We just brought in a new CNC. So we have 2 large format production CNCs in the shop. We have a whole distribution wing of our warehouse. It's about 1,500 square feet with multiple packers. And so when we bring people in, one of the things that I know you can attest to, Steve, is that we struggle with creativity, right? I've put out 250 free videos in the last 3 years. And you sit down by yourself and you go, what's next? What can I talk about next? And I never want to phone it in. I never want to put out a video because it's like, I should get a video out this week. And so I think bringing in other woodworkers, I always hire from my audience. I never hire outside my audience. So it's always people who believe in our mission already. Bringing other people in who have great ideas, who maybe, newer or earlier place on their journey, it brings so much fresh perspective and allows us to have a collaborative sort of environment here where we can go, hey, I got this idea for something. What do you think? For example, something we're developing right now is a blast gate that automatically turns your dust collector on. And we're going to create this for less than $20. Whereas you look on if you Google automatic blast gates, they're like $800 packages. Crazy. I mean, they're inaccessible to anybody, but guys flying rockets into space.
Let's talk about a recent video you had about robots.
Yeah. Let's
get into this because, like I mentioned, your channel is kind of a mix of old school hand tool woodworking and technology. And for a while, it was whenever somebody would bring a CNC into a shop or into a video, you would hear, this isn't woodworking, this isn't wood. Well, you just went that extra mile and went to a robot factory where they're making robots do the woodworking. What is it about that inspires you, and where do you see that heading?
So I love technology. Like, I'm obsessed with where woodworking is going. In fact, I think one thing I'd love to touch on with you is sort of how to grow the craft of woodworking here in a minute. But the thing that inspired me, there was a viewer of the channel who was like one of the upper level executives with this company reached out to me and said, hey, I saw your sandpaper test. We make a random orbital sander tool attachment for these industrial robots. Do you want to come out here and check it out? And of course I said yes instantly because, tech is so cool. And I got to spend a week out there and see what this company did. It was not a sponsored video in any way. I paid to go out there. But it is my opinion that these robots will so enhance our hobby and craft because they are going to become affordable and they are going to take away the unsafe and the mundane. And I think they're going to allow small professional woodworkers, like a lot of our audiences, when you become a woodworker, you almost by de facto become a professional woodworker because suddenly your mother-in-law wants a cutting board and your sister,
Everybody's got a project for you.
Right. And so these are going to allow small shops, maybe 1 or 2 guys to increase production exponentially because it's like, all right, robot, sand this. And the tech is already here where you can take the arm of the robot and show it what to do without programming a single thing. And it will repeat that movement. And so that's only going to get better. The tech's only going to get cheaper. So I think these are coming. And I think that the people that say they're going to take our jobs are just, I think they're mostly incorrect. I think some jobs will, of course, become, automated. But a lot of times when you have tech like this, you look at a CNC makes so much money for my company and it's an unpaid employee that doesn't need to take breaks, but I still need somebody to run it. I still need somebody to prepare wood. I still need somebody to process it afterwards. So it actually creates jobs because I now have somebody who works in my shop whose sole job is to tend the machines. And that job wouldn't have existed if I didn't have those machines in my shop. So that's an extra income that we've created just by having these machines. So it is my belief, like these robots will absolutely be able to do just about anything. They're already in hospitals with a small tube down the middle of the tooling, able to radiate tumors in people's lungs rather than you sitting and getting radiated throughout your whole body. So people are going home, they're not sick. This thing can track your movement as you breathe and only radiate the tumor. I mean, they're incredible what they can do. So I wanted to expose my audience to it. I knew it would be a bomb of a video. It got half the views my videos normally get, but that's okay to me because I think it's so important to look at that. And if I'm the guy who brought it to our attention. And 4 years from now, people are, it's starting to come in people's shops like CNCs did. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I think that I kind of addressed this a few years ago when there was a lot of complaints about technology in woodworking. And I don't think that there's any reason to like fear technology. It just simply exists, it grows, and it's part of woodworking. And if you're building things out of wood, it's woodworking. I think where people get confused is, for me, there's a big difference between a hobbyist and somebody who really is earning a living off of woodworking. And the technology, as far as running a production shop, can be super beneficial. I think where some people have a question about it coming into the hobbyist shop is because it will probably become affordable at some, even like CNCs that, just wasn't too long ago where they were pretty expensive and now they're affordable. But I think the question gets at what point does it no longer become really a hobby woodworking? In other words, I think people like to use the analogy, well, you started with hand tools, but then you're using a power tool. So you're using technology, and so what's the difference? But I think the difference is that it could get to the point where at least in a power saw or a table saw, routers, you're still manually controlling the wood. So there's that feeling of woodworking. So I think the only thing probably people are having a difficulty with is the terminology. Right. Calling it woodworking, really, because I think there just needs to be maybe a different name for it or something. Because if the ultimate goal is to never actually have to set foot in a shop, that you can just sit at a desk and do woodworking, is it still woodworking?
Right. But I think, my retort to that argument, which I think is totally valid, is one, there was a day when a table saw came out. What do you think people said back then? And now it's part of the common vernacular in the shop. But also, what is the point of craft and hobby? It's to expand your brain outside of your place of employment. And that's what's important. And I think when people say this isn't real woodworking, I say it isn't to you. Right. To me, it is. I love technology and I love sitting at my computer and designing a piece and then taking it somewhere else and cutting those pieces out and assembling it. That to me gives me great joy, just like dovetails give me great joy, which is ultra hand tool woodworking. But for me, it's about creating, and that's what gives me joy. And it may be different for you. You may enjoy getting out there and spending 4 weeks flattening a board with your hand plane, and more power to you. But I think the attitude that, people jump on people in the comments about this is BS, this isn't real, it is wrong, because the point is to just grow your mind and have fun doing something you enjoy, right?
Right. And there's still, I think that's why we see a rise in hand tool woodworkers, because there's always going to be, sure, you don't need to have a hand saw to do woodworking. Now we've got power saws, and yet people are really drawn to cutting dovetails by hand because there's just the feeling to it. Nobody's going to go into a production hand cutting boards. It wouldn't be efficient at all to do that. So you've got to have this other technology. And I don't know if at some point it might be, you could sit and design and build and assemble an entire product or project by sitting at a desk, sending it over the internet to a shop, which would cut the pieces, have it all done for you, and then just shipped right to you. And is that woodworking? I don't know. If you're enjoying doing it, there's wood. You're not working with the wood. You're not even touching the wood, but you're getting a wooden product that you designed. And yeah, so I don't know. I guess these are all questions.
Yeah, I think it's a hobby, and that's all that matters. Something you enjoy. I'm a big fly fisherman. I've been since I was a kid. And I get the same feeling when I have my ear muffs on and I'm in the shop, as I do fly fishing. It's so meditative. And that's the important part, I think, is finding something to free your mind from the drim and drab of the day-to-day hustle. Right. And in fact, once a year between Christmas and New Year's, I close the shop and I come in and I build something that I don't record. I don't post on Instagram. Nobody will ever see it but me, because I always need to remind myself that feeling. because it's easy to lose it when you do what we do.
Do you plan on doing many project videos? You've never really done a lot of project videos per se on your channel. Do you think that might be something you might explore now that you're expanding the business?
Yeah, we're focused. We actually haven't posted a lot of videos this summer. For a long time, we were 2 videos a week. And then, we fluctuated between 2 and 1, but we've been working on a new business plan that we're implementing with the tool distribution company. So I've been sitting at my desk most of the summer, which is frustrating. But part of the hiring that we're doing now is to free me up from the most time consuming parts of my job, like, the product development where I'm sitting there drawing things in Fusion for 8 hours, to free me up so that I can get back to the content. Cause that's what my business is built on. The back of, is my teaching and my ability to share what I love so much about woodworking. So that's a very important part of the business to me, is to create content. And so we are gearing up to get back into a lot more great, just woodworking videos and projects. And when you've taught so many skills that I've taught, there's so many times I can say the 7 best something,
It's hard.
So I'm excited to maybe share a little bit more, get back to what we used to do a little bit more, where we teach a technique out of what I'm making and then release that video and get a couple projects out a month.
Yeah, it's getting harder and harder to produce project videos on YouTube. I think there's a lot of people doing it, and it's like hard to compete.
It certainly is. I got the opportunity to sit down with one of the co-creators of Patreon one-on-one for an hour last week. And he and I talked a lot about this. And, he talked about the creator economy and how so many people are entering the marketplace that it's very hard to rise above that. But if you can, if you're a person that enjoys sharing your passion, when you have the opportunity to do that, it's important, to create economies around yourself so that you can focus on the content. Because I think it's, in the hustle that you and I get pushed into, you're like almost pressured to get stuff out instead of doing the things you really love to do. And so whenever young YouTubers come to me and ask for advice, I say, just do what you like to do. People will find that infectious. And the chance of you making money before 150,000 subs is small. This is such an expensive hobby to produce that just do what you love and let the audience fall into place. Don't try and follow the trends. Don't, try and do what all these other YouTubers are doing. Do what makes you happy, and people will see that, and you can grow.
Yeah, it's the dilemma of starting a woodworking channel, and specifically is because it's like any kind of channel on YouTube, is what do you bring to the table that's different than 1,000 other guys that are doing the exact same kind of thing? It's hard to differentiate yourself. You got to have that hook. I think people need to, when they stop by a woodworking channel, they need to know instantly what it's about, and who it's supposed to appeal to. Definitely.
Well, I think too, I went to Arizona this last weekend and spoke at a grand opening of a woodworking school for a friend of mine named William Douglas, who's a small YouTuber, maybe 25, 30,000 subs, but one of the best designers I've ever seen. And I went out there on my own volition. He invited me, but I paid for my ticket. I went out there and stayed and spoke at this event about growing the craft and how important it is to support each other as a community. Because when I got into woodworking, I came from a construction background and thought woodworking was chop saws and 2x4s and making planter boxes. I didn't realize that there was such a vast subject matter to explore. And there was a friend of mine who was a woodworker who shared a shop with 3 other really great woodworkers. And he let me hang out every day and ask questions and play with their tools. And I got to see what was possible. And that's what really grew my passion. And so, I love to tell people, like, support anybody who's curious. Invite them to your shop, show them what you do. And, if a guy who just got started needs to use your planer, let him do it, because when people enter the craft, that means more innovation, more great ideas coming out, but also tools get cheaper because people are buying them. The cost of manufacturing goes down because there's more of a demand. Same with lumber, more people buying lumber, price goes down. So we want people to join, and we don't want to gatekeep or say something is not real woodworking. Yeah,
I've been actually writing up a script for a video on gatekeeping in woodworking, because I've been really seeing a rise of that in the past few years. It used to be not quite the same way, but now people are really kind of becoming the arbiters of what is woodworking. And it kind of drives me crazy. The first time I really saw that was back with pocket hole jigs, when that was a thing, when people were like, this isn't woodworking because you're not cutting a real joint or something. And I never really understood that, but I think that every community will have their gatekeepers, it seems like. So I guess woodworking is a community in that sense.
It's the one, like, the negative comments we get, and I never respond. I never engage unless it's a constructive criticism. If someone says, hey, I disagree with you, here's why, I'll engage. Because I think that's a respectful way of doing it. But if you want to set me off, if you want to get a response from me, gatekeep something, and I'll say, hey man, you don't get to decide what woodworking is or why this project is bad. Like, this guy's enjoying his craft. Let him do it. Because I think it's detrimental to the craft. And I think, one thing that was so special during the pandemic is how many people entered our hobby.
It's huge.
And to tell somebody they're wrong 6 months into their journey, that's crushing to them because they don't know any better. They haven't had time to define their style and say, I'm not wrong, I love this. Like, they have some random, user squirrel 68 on Reddit said that I'm an idiot and now I must not be good at this.
It's overwhelming entering woodworking. I just wrote my newsletter. It's coming out it'll come out. It'll already have been out by the time this episode is released. But I wrote a piece about this very topic because I released these shorts, YouTube shorts. I'm really fascinated by these things. And a lot of that is just condensing an idea down into basically 150 words or less. And it's one specific thing. So here's this one thing that you can know about woodworking. And somebody left a comment and said, I just get overwhelmed. There's so many things to know about woodworking. I can't keep it all straight. And I had this fear that, I can see that, because you and I have been woodworking for so long. We take a lot of these things for granted. We take, if I mentioned that I'm going to make a rip cut, there's a lot of people who have no idea what a rip cut is. So there needs to be a resource for that. And at the same time, we're having so much of this information, just everywhere, all of the time, that I think the best advice is to start building something. I think just by experimenting, and look, you gotta saw a board. You can do that with a jigsaw. You can teach somebody how to saw a board in under a minute, and you need to assemble it. You can teach somebody how to drill a hole and drive a screw in about 2 minutes. Just start experimenting, because you can sit and watch YouTube videos and get, just paralysis by analysis, right? You're just like overthinking everything. And it's just best to just start woodworking.
Right. One of the biggest things I stand for on my channel is we don't hide our mistakes. And the only difference between me and you is that I know how to fix them. And so every project we do, at the end of the video, I sit down in my outro or leading into my outro and say, let's talk about where I screwed up. I did this, I broke this. Here's a little clip of me fixing it. Or I tried this. I tried a technique on a jewelry box I built a few months ago for a friend, where I was using white oak and wangi, which are both very porous woods. They have big open grain in them. So I tried to grain fill it, and I matched the wrong color of the white oak. And so I had to sit there and sand it all out, and it was a nightmare. And so I shared that with my audience. I said, look, I told you I love this technique, and I do, and it worked great on the wangi, but I'm an idiot, and I used the wrong color on the white oak. And this was a 2-hour problem for me. And so people love that, because when I started, I'd watch, guys like you and David Picciuto, and you go, these guys never screw up, and then you realize that, the best woodworkers in the world screw up on every project. They just know how to fix it easily. And it's important to communicate that to beginners, that like, look, you're never going to get perfect. So just get over it and go make some stuff, because you're just beating yourself up trying to consume every YouTube video, when the best knowledge you're going to get is in the shop making your own mistakes.
Yeah, I think the best advice is always keep moving forward in a project. And all of that, knowing how to fix mistakes, just comes with sheer experience and just reps, just by doing actual woodworking, because you're not going to remember every single little tip somebody has on YouTube and the 7 best ways to pound a nail and all of this stuff. It's just, you got you got to just get out there and work, and and that's, to me, is, in a way, that's the most interesting part about woodworking, is that every single project comes with its own set of challenges to overcome.
Yeah, that's what has always drawn me to it, is the every project is unique. I learn something every time I build something, and you just get better at it, and you learn the things that really make you happy when you build. But there's one of the biggest things that you can tell a beginner's project on is the corners. Did they thin something out after you make this table and it's square and it's, ready to be glued up? Did they take the time to put, a big heavy chamfer, a tapering chamfer on one leg? And that's like the things you learn by doing, because you finish that project as a beginner and you're like, wow, this is great. I love it. And you move on and you start to look at other tables. You realize, like, why do their legs look so much skinnier than mine? Why? And you go, oh, next time I'd love to put a tapering chamfer on that leg, which I think will take some weight off the bottom and focus attention on the top. Those are the design elements you learn only by doing.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. One of the most, I think, visible signs of somebody who's just starting woodworking and trying to design their own projects is just proportion. I think just, you can tell if a table is just a little too high or just looks a little odd in just the way it's shaped, or like a credenza or something. And I'm not even sure. I mean, sure, there's like the golden ratio. You could go with that, but there's something that you just got to kind of have a sense for, I guess.
You just learn as you go. One of my favorite things to do is to go on the subreddits, R Woodworking and R Beginner Woodworking, and just comment on people's pictures and encourage them, because that's one of the most vicious places on the internet, but also one of the most supportive too. So I love to just go on. I get, my Katz-Moses woodworking flair next to my name, so they know it's me. And I say, hey man, that's awesome. If you ever want somebody to look at your designs, send me an email and I'll post my email. Or, I love to encourage people, because that's the fun of woodworking, is sharing it when it's done, right? And that's why I got into posting online, because I loved the feedback. And to post and then get beat up or kept is frustrating, and it's demoralizing. And so, it's important to support people and find those people where you say, oh, that's definitely a beginner, but they kicked butt on this. I mean, it came out great. So great job. If you ever want to improve, here's something I'd try next time, or something like that. And that's the way to grow the craft, I think, sort of as we're talking about this.
What's your favorite part of the whole process of YouTube?
It's a very good question. My favorite part is the community, I think, and that's not just my politician answer. I really enjoy bringing people together. Like this event that I went and spoke at in Arizona, 100 people came out. People drove from 6-7 hours away to come see me talk and support William with the opening of his school. And it's like just the sense of community for people who enjoy working with their hands or creating things is so cool. And it really, overall, I mean, we've been talking a lot about gatekeeping and, bringing people down, but all in all, I mean, it's 98% really supportive, and people just loving the fact that other people have the same hobby as them. And I think that's just really a neat part about it.
Right. When you first started on YouTube, did you do everything yourself? The shooting, the editing, and all of that?
Yeah, I realized really quickly I was a much better woodworker than an editor. So I woodworking, what sort of pushed me into it was first, I wanted to be able to share high-res videos with my family. And Facebook would only let you upload 15 seconds, and text message obviously would down-res it to like 96p. So I started posting on YouTube to be able to send links to my parents. And then people would start commenting like, this is so cool and this is great. And then I had a video that got, 15,000 views of me just talking about a jewelry box I made. And I was like,
that was probably the one with the secret compartment, I'll bet. Yeah.
Yep. And that was really inspiring to know that there was other people out there, because woodworking is a very lonely hobby. You know, it's not like 6 guys on your streets have their garage doors open on a Saturday and you hear table saws running. It's like, you know, 5 people in your whole city sometimes. And
yeah. I think people who see woodworking, especially on YouTube, think that we're always active in the shops. And years ago, YouTube was promoting this 360 camera, you know, and I kind of toyed around with getting one of those. I thought, well, maybe I could just set it up, just do a live stream. But I got to thinking, it's boring in my shop. I mean, it's like 95% of the time is me just kind of standing and looking at something and thinking and puttering, like pacing back of, oh, I got to grab this thing and let me think a little bit more. It is just, there's not a lot going on in woodworking. It's kind of like, I don't know, it's like football, I guess. There's a lot of standing around, but then the play comes and it's really exciting.
Right. And I mean, that's the fun of YouTube videos, is you don't have to deal with the 96% of the time you're sitting there scratching your head. You're like, why is that too short? What jig do I have set up wrong right now? Where did I go wrong? What did I measure wrong? Or I cut it exactly to the plans. Why doesn't it fit? You know, so
I've made tons of those kind of mistakes. I mean, usually I notice them like 2 steps after. I'm like, wait a second here. Why isn't this thing fitting together? And it's my own plans. I just misread them or something. I'm like, I'm such an idiot. Why do I cut this at the wrong size?
Yeah. I had a table I did a couple months ago. It had a glass top. It was beautiful, really very modern, with these crazy angled legs with bridle joints. And I, in my head, thought that I could cut this bridle joint for the 60-degree angle on the triangles, because it was 3-legged table, and leave the excess, and that would be fine. I could just flush trim it later. But then the excess caused it not to go together. So I'm sitting here at this glue up. I didn't check it. I'm like, it's not going. And so I'm like running over the table saw, trying to, you know, use the dado stack to get this off, and ended up getting it together. But I should have checked it. I should have dry fit the table before I blew it up. But I drew the plan, so I was so set in my head that it was going to work. You know, Fusion put it together, no problem. Why can't I do it? So it's a lot of screwing up and figuring and jotting in your notebook and doing math, and a lot less woodworking.
Let's talk just a minute about safety, because you had, now I can hear everybody just clicking away. As soon as I say safety, I'm like, oh, everybody's. But you know, you had a injury in your shop on a jointer, and you posted that, and you got a lot of views on that. But I also think that like injury porn on, like, especially Instagram is real popular. Right. People like to see those injuries. But I think you made an interesting point about safety in the wood shop, is be prepared, but anybody can get injured in woodworking. It doesn't matter how experienced you are. It just takes a split second of being distracted, not thinking, especially if you're doing a bunch of repetitive work. It's so easy. I found myself coming close a couple of times to getting injured just because I'm cutting the same pieces over and over. So how do you prevent that, knowing that there's no way of preventing it? You know what I mean?
So actually, I kind of put my money where my mouth is on that video, which is the next video we released, we interviewed a trauma surgeon, a trauma PA, and a paramedic. We put out a 25-minute video about what to do in the event that you are injured. Because the thing that I realized, having never suffered a major injury, was that I was doing something that was I was fixing a problem from a video. So it was on the weekend, and I wasn't shooting. So maybe I wasn't as attentive to how I looked on camera safety wise. And I said, I can do this. And I had successfully jointed 3 of 4 legs that were only a ½ inch tall. And they were slipping on my paddle. So I sort of did my hands and moved them over the cutter, and I was hyper focused. I knew that it wasn't the safest thing, but I was focused and I felt good about it. And then someone walked in and gave me some bad business news about a product that was the Dovetail Jig that he makes, and they were out of material. It was right during Christmas, our busiest time. So I was just thinking about that. And I didn't pick up my backhand, and I literally just ran my thumb over the jointer.
That sends chills down my spine just thinking about that right now, because man, it's just the thud that probably made on your finger. Boom.
Well, here's what nobody tells you about injury, and what we discussed in the subsequent video where we interviewed those people is your fight or flight response kicks on, your body dumps all of its adrenaline, and you go into this survival mode, which causes your short-term memory to completely go. And all you are is operating on instinct. So I was so scared to look at my thumb, because you hear the Perkins brothers story, his hand gets sucked into a joiner. I didn't know what I was going to see. And I knew that, you get an injury like that, all your nerves are gone, so you maybe don't feel pain for a while. And so I walked around my shop for almost 60 seconds without looking at it. I turned off my dust collector for some reason.
You got to save on the electricity, right?
Right. I didn't want to waste the air.
Right.
And I couldn't think of what to do. I couldn't tell myself, look, stop the bleeding, go to the hospital. I couldn't come up with a plan. And that scared me because I wasn't prepared. My first aid kit was in a hard to reach area. I didn't maybe have a tourniquet, other things that are important to have just in case worst case scenario happens.
And it probably didn't hurt immediately, did it?
Not at all.
Yeah.
I knew it had happened because it felt like
it's like a hammer or something hitting you, I'll bet.
It's like getting stung by a bee. You know what happened, but you didn't see it happen. And it was like, the impact of that thing hitting my thumb was really heavy. And so I knew it had happened. And I just scared me so bad. I was like, in my head in that 60 seconds was picturing my life as a woodworker was over. Maybe I don't have a thumb anymore. It was just terrifying and I didn't know what to do. And so the video we released later talked about like how to overcome that. And that's preparation. And that it can happen to anyone. I got stories in the comments of guys like, I've been woodworking for 30 years, never had an injury, and I chopped off my pinky last week on the table saw. And it can happen if a wood, your wood has pressure in it, binds up, and it's not even your fault. You get a kickback and it drags your hand over the blade. So preparation is key. You prepare for the unthinkable, I think.
All you can do is try to do the best safety practices you can and understand that there's always a risk. There's always going to be a chance that something can happen. I don't, and I hope that doesn't scare away people, because I think a lot of people are especially terrified of a table saw. At least when I hear from people who are brand new to woodworking, they're like, well, I've tried the jigsaw, I've used a miter saw, but the table saw, that just freaks me out. And there's a barrier, a mental barrier you have to get past before using a table saw. I know you've got a couple of saw stops, and that you even have a slow-mo, one of those super slow-mo cameras of stopping on a hot dog on there. Would you ever consider doing that on your finger?
Yeah,
with the slow-mo cam.
Yeah,
not the hot dog, or using your finger as the actual.
Yeah, absolutely. Really? It's that good. I wouldn't have before the slow-mo video, but I know how fast I went in the slow-mo video, and you never are cutting wood that fast. So if you ask me to just put my thumb up, I'm 100% certain it would stop. It does not. That
would be really hard to do that, I'll bet.
It would be tough to do, but people in the comments of that video has 17 million views always say, if it's so good, test it with your finger. I mean, 90% of the comments are that. And my answer to that, I don't answer the comments, but my answer is same reason they don't test airbags with real people. What if? What if? But SawStop has never had an injury in the history of they've never had an amputation in the history.
It seems like a flawless technology from what I've seen. I've never seen it fail.
They never have. I mean, no. They've never had it.
Do you think that that technology, and especially now that it's going to be expanding, like we mentioned before, that it might be expanding out to other brands, do you think it might make people a little bit more complacent with their saws and not quite as diligent with, and using, say, a push stick and I can put my finger through there, it's okay, the SawStop's got me covered? Maybe.
I'll tell you, sadly, I've never had a cavalier attitude towards safety. I always preach it, and I think I'm pretty good. I have failures sometimes that people will point out in videos that I didn't even think about. But the injury changed my thought process now, where I am never I'm never comfortable when I use a tool. I'm prepared. I think about it every time. I never go up to my table saw anymore and just push something through. I go, okay, how do we prevent a kickback? Because that's still a risk with a saw stop is a kickback. I've seen one in my life and it put a huge dent in a cinder block wall, took a huge chip out of it. It was 40 feet behind my saw. I never want to be in the way of one of those. And so I still think about it every time, but I could see it causing sort of a complacency. However, there's a human need to preserve yourself. And when you see a spinning 10-inch piece of metal at 4,000 RPM.
That's why you just can't put your thumb in there. I couldn't do that. I couldn't put my thumb in there for a slow-mo video. No way. I wouldn't try. Even though I know it's perfectly safe, I don't know if I could do that. It's just a mental block. Only
because I've done 9 activations with a high-speed camera, I could do it. Right. But I wouldn't have done it before. But it's really that good, and it still scratch you. You talk about repetition. The only time I ever set off my saw stop on my own was I used to make the dovetail jigs out of wood, and I'd make 50, 60 a week, and I would do all the movements repetitive. And one day, it was Christmas. I had a bunch of orders, and I was cutting the posts, which are 2 inches long, and I had one twist when I pulled my crosscut sled away. So I very, very purposefully and carefully took my pointer finger to pull it out of the way, but I stuck my pinky up, like a British royalty would drink tea.
SpongeBob.
And I stuck my pinky into the saw because I was looking at my pointer finger, and it stopped. It didn't even draw blood. It looked like if you just took your fingernail and scratched yourself.
Right.
So, I know it works, but it's like you said, it's not thinking about it and worrying about it. It's when you become complacent, when you're doing repetitive things, that you need to keep your focus. Yeah. And that's, I think, the important part of safety is every time a tool is on, you are thinking about, hey, how can this hurt me and how am I going to avoid that?
I think the worst injuries I've had in woodworking has actually been from my power sanders, because I think that's such a safe tool, and I get my knuckles in there, and I mean, they're not huge injuries, but it'll definitely scrape your knuckles pretty bad if you get them caught in there. And I always think that's just so dumb, because it's a power tool like any other. Why am I treating this one so cavalier?
Right.
We should treat all tools.
I think the worst injuries that people get are with hand tools.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Because I think it's almost a rite of passage for woodworkers to have a scar right here from taking a chisel and holding the piece of wood with your hand, and you stick it in your hand. And people forget that, sharp hand tools are going to do almost more damage than, spinning tools, because a spinning tool, you get your hand out of the way quick, but you do dumb stuff with hand tools, like hand planes. You support a board and run it over your finger, whatever it is. So those have always been my worst injuries prior to the joiner injury, was with a chisel.
Do you have anything you'd really like to try out with that slow-mo cam?
So we rented a new one.
Yeah, I saw you got that's a better one, right? Isn't it?
It's 5 times slower at the same resolution.
Crazy.
At 2K. So we're going to do a video on chip load. So proper router feeds and speeds. There's a very
that's interesting. Yeah.
Well, and it's one of the most unknown things, because it's always, you get tables from companies that give suggested, but how do you translate that to pushing with my hands?
Right. Yeah.
And the 1 through 6 dial, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And so we're going to show what proper chip load looks like, so people will be able to identify if they're doing it correctly visually. And we're going to blow up a dust collector, because I am under the firm belief you cannot blow up a dust collector. And I have scientific proof of that, and we're going to do it on camera to prove that it's not possible. We are going to do, I have my list somewhere. Well, I won't dig through my briefcase here. But we are going to rent it for a week this time. Last time I only had it for 2 days. We were able to make 10 videos out of that. So we're going to rent it for a week, and we've got a whole list of things we're going to do that are really exciting. And I think we'll look at things in woodworking nobody's ever explored before.
What's the setup like on that? Does it take a long time to set up for a shot on that? I bet it takes.
Yeah. So you need so much, you need like
a lot of light.
10 times the brightness of the sun, The lights are so hot that when we were shooting that saw stop video, I was dripping sweat, because I'm in the shot with those lights, and they're so hot, and they're LEDs, mind you. That's how many lights you have. The hardest part about those cameras is data management, because 1 second on that camera is 13 minutes of what we're shooting now at 24 frames per second.
Wow.
So the amount of data it created, we filled up 8 2 terabyte Samsung SSD drives on that shoot.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
How much did it cost to rent that thing?
It is about $8,000 for 2 days. And then so this was a surprise to me. I committed to it. And then the amount of production stuff, you need like 8 2 terabyte Samsung at $500 a pop. You need 3 people operating. You need to rent a special computer with a special Cinestation is what it's called for transferring data quickly. So it ended up being about an $18,000 2-day shoot for me, which was one of the scariest things I've ever done because I got committed and sort of just had to go with it. And luckily that Saw Stop video got 17 million views.
Yeah.
Now we're renting it again, and we have a lot of that stuff already purchased, so we'll be able to cut the cost on it, which is exciting.
Well, that's great. Well, Jonathan, I want to thank you for joining me on the Woodworking Talk Show. I'm just owning that name now. There was a while there where it was up in the air, but now here we are.
I know you were struggling with that mentally, but I think it is fantastic, and I've had a fantastic time talking. It's always fun to really discuss the ins and outs with somebody who's in the same field as me. So
it is. It's exciting, and I wish you all the best with all of your new products. And everybody, check out Jonathan Katz-Moses on YouTube and his shop on his website. You can Google that and find it, and get one of those fancy dovetail jigs that you don't need the router to use. You just need a saw.
Or the stop block.
Oh, and the stop block too, right. You've got the stop block. You're going to have all kinds of new stuff on there in the near future. Now that you've got all these new people working for you, that's going to be great. And good luck with the hiring process. I know that can be really time consuming and exhausting.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for your time, Steve. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and I'll see you next time.